Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, amazing people all across the world of crypto and blockchain. And I have another amazing guest for you today. He is the founder and director of Nyan Heroes. His name is Max Fu. Max, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jamil. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Thank you for joining me. And I want to kick things off because you have a really interesting background, and I want to hear all about it. So let's do that. What is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Yeah, I guess on paper it doesn't seem logical, but there is a very good reason as to why this has all happened. So, I've lived a few different lives, obviously. Um, you know, when I was growing up as a kid, I always loved video games, but growing up in a fairly traditional Asian household, there were only a few options for me coming out of high school, and that was accountant, lawyer, or doctor. Quite typical. So I picked medicine simply because I thought it was the most interesting out of the three, and I happened to be somewhat smart enough to get into the degree. So I did a 6 year degree of got my Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, and then worked in the medical industry for another 7 years after that as a surgeon. So mostly focused around gastrointestinal surgery. Did 7 years as a initially started as an intern, then resident, and then eventually became a registrar and then senior surgical registrar. Um, and yeah, it was interesting. It was very intellectually stimulating, but ultimately, it wasn't what I was passionate about. So I ended up leaving that industry. It was kind of fairly sudden, actually. And most of my colleagues were fairly surprised. My parents, they almost disowned me. But I kind of wanted to, I guess, spend the next 40, 50 years of my life not doing something that I hated, and decided that I would explore a passion of mine, which I'd always been keen on doing, but never really had an opportunity to explore, which was the creative industry. I have a pretty, I would say, I have a pretty unique creative mind, and I'm always interested in creating content and creating products that people enjoy because I really like connecting with users and community. So I went into the creative industry, learned everything myself. The brilliant thing about the internet these days is that you can kind of go anywhere and learn anything as long as you have a will. So I taught myself cinematography, film, lighting, gaffer, grip, and eventually found myself in the creative director role. Worked a lot on commercial work with brands like Samsung, Netflix, and Google, and eventually set up my own media company as a creative director there as well, where I scaled it up over 8 years, built up a fairly diverse online user base of over 30 million users month to month, and created various digital content for multiple verticals, including entertainment, lifestyle, including gaming. So my background coming into Nine Heroes is more on the creative side. It's taking my experience as a creative director, it's taking my experience as a founder and a business owner in the space, as well as my experience in connecting with users and community on a day to day, and bringing them things that ultimately they find joy in, that they find memorable, and connecting users with amazing, unique experiences. So that's how I came into Nine Heroes. I'd got into the sort of Web3 scene in around 2017. This was while I was building my media company business, and really it was 2020 and 2021 that got me really excited into all the opportunities that the Web3 industry had to offer. And I thought it was a perfect opportunity to sort of take my creative direction, experience and skills, and skills in business and skills in building communities, and start off Nine Heroes. We were actually a community-based project in the very beginning. We didn't We weren't a AAA studio spin-off that went ahead and found funding or anything like that. We built a community around a shared vision, around this crazy, quirky idea of cats piloting mechs. And that was how we started. We found funding after that, and then the studio came after the funding. So it was very much a different kind of direction in how things got started. But ultimately, we started with community. Right now, we have one of the biggest communities in Web3 gaming space, and I think one of the coolest IPs. So this is, I guess, yeah, a short synopsis of how Nyan Heroes began.
I love it. I would say creativity is much more fun and exciting than gastroenterology.
Each with its own challenges.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to consensus this year in a couple weeks. 2 years ago, I signed up to go, but I had a bad piece of sushi and I was in the hospital for 5 days. So I'm really looking forward to this year. I want to talk about Nine Heroes. What's it all about? What's your purpose? Yeah, what's it all about? And what does it do well? What do I look forward to doing when I start playing your game?
Yeah, I mean, Nine Heroes is a competitive movement shooter where the player controls a small cat piloting a giant mech. It's team based, so there's two teams, and players fight over various objectives on different maps. The game mode itself is probably most familiar to players that play games like Team Fortress 2 or Overwatch 2. Those are probably the closest similarities when it comes to game mode. And essentially, the vision of the game or the project itself, we started out with a vision in day one. It hasn't changed over the last couple of years at all, and that is to build a high quality game. I don't want to say AAA because that term is kind of thrown around all over the place in Web3, and it often doesn't mean anything. But a game that is high quality, that is clearly built with love and soul to it, that has its own identity, that also brings something unique, not only to the Web3 gaming space, but that would sit on its own, even alongside Web2 titles, even the AAA titles that you see on Twitch or YouTube, like the Apex Legends, like the Valorants. We want to bring something that is comparable in quality, but also has its own voice and its own identity. Um, yeah.
Very cool. And your pre-alpha demo just wrapped up, right? What was that experience like, and what were some of the takeaways?
That was a whirlwind of an experience. We obviously been building heads down over the last just over 2 years through the bear market as well, which had its own challenges. And we recently ran a pre-alpha demo via Epic Games that lasted around 2 weeks. Um, we were obviously optimistic. Internally in the team, we were really happy with the state of the project, even though it was pre-alpha and still early. We all felt like it had a great core loop, something that was unique, interesting, and fun. And we were excited to share that with our community as well as the broader sort of Web3 gaming community. So we were optimistic. We had some high hopes. However, the pre-alpha wildly outperformed even our own internal expectations by many fold. We became one of the most wishlisted games on the Epic Game Store. We had over 1.3 million user registrations on our website. We registered over 700,000 unique active wallets. And when the game went live, over the course of 2 weeks, we registered over 200,000 downloads. We had over 45,000 daily active users playing the game day to day towards the end of our pre alpha. And even though we were only live for 2 weeks, we actually managed to make it into the top 30 most played games on Epic Games globally, which, as far as I'm aware, at least in the Web3 space, I mean, if we were even a Web2 game, I think we would be really happy as a small studio to kind of reach that benchmark. But being a Web3 game and seeing those kind of numbers was just mind blowing, and completely unexpected from our side. But I think as a studio, we were really happy with the product, and I think that ultimately that's what stood out to our community as well as the people that we were showcasing our game to. We had a lot of positive feedback from not only Web3 gamers but also Web2 gamers and content creators. That this was really interesting. It felt really unique, and ultimately it was fun. That's the most important thing.
I love it. You don't see a lot of you don't see a lot of companies, whether it be Web 2 or Web 3, crack that the epic right away. So that's really awesome. Um, but you said you're talking about your team a little bit. You mentioned your team. And you mentioned that you built a community first. So you didn't just nab people from Web 2 and bring them over. People came over, right? Your team is made up of a mix of Web 2 veterans and Web 3 developers. So you have an advantage there with the adoption. What's your advantage, and what insights that do you have that other games who are just startups may not have?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because building in Web3 has been quite an eye-opening experience for me. And the thing about Web3 is the space moves really quickly. And because the space moves really quickly, narratives also move really quickly in Web3. In fact, a lot of projects and kind of uh, trends are based around narratives alone in Web3. And I think what has happened in the gaming sector for Web3, I find it to be fairly interesting because originally it started out with, things like Axie and was play to earn. And then there was this narrative shift of, okay, well, it can't be play to earn. You need a good game. You need something that's sustainable, something, where users will just play for fun and they're not always after a return on their investment. And that became the prevailing narrative. And now it's kind of the narrative is shifted again. And people are talking about, well, you need to have this degen mindset, or you need to be able to kind of cater to the Web3 degens in order to succeed. And, between the first narrative and the one that I just mentioned, there's probably been 10 other narratives mixed in between. The thing with us is that our thesis hasn't really changed from day one. I'm a pretty simple dude. I think I try not to overcomplicate things. And when I look at games over the last sort of 2 decades, even though the format has changed, the monetization has changed, the devices have changed, one thing has never changed, and that is for a game to be successful, it must be fun. I don't want to overcomplicate things and start kind of over engineering what it takes to make a good game in Web3. The fundamental core principle is it should be fun. And that's what we've been building towards. When you look at our team composition, we mostly have uh, traditional game developers working on the game. And everything that we do when it comes to game design, visuals, IP, narrative, lore, core loops, it's all done through a traditional Web 2 development, workflow and lens. So ultimately, what the team is trying to do is to create an experience that is enjoyable and fun. We do have obviously some Web3 natives working on the team, some Web3 developers, as well as biz dev in Web3. That's all necessary, but we skew Web2 heavily because ultimately you can financially engineer the game as much as you want. You can create all these flywheels, you can create all these different incentives, and you can really leverage that degen mindset. But at the end of the day, if your product is not fun, it's not sticky, there's no engagement, there's no retention, or in fact, it's just vaporware, it's not going to be sustainable. So that's how we operate.
I remember I played games a long time. I love playing, Deadly Towers. I love playing Sword of Vermilion. That's back in Nintendo and
Mhm.
Sega days. There's one game I played on my computer before that was called King's Quest. And I got to the throne. I was supposed to, it says you have to romance the throne. So I typed in romance the throne and nothing happened. And other people would type it in and then they complete the game. And I was like, okay, this is no longer fun. So you remember experiences, you know? Um, so I get it. I understand. So from your rollout strategy, how do you think other Web3 gaming companies can navigate? Because there's a competitive landscape in gaming. A lot of gaming companies in the space. It might be oversaturated. What are the key takeaways that you can offer as advice to other Web3 gaming companies, who are building now? Obviously, fun is one of them.
Yeah, I mean I think that should be the baseline criteria. But obviously everyone has their own approach. But this is our approach. I think when it comes to the gaming space in Web3, yes, it is getting saturated, and yes, there's a lot of noise. Um, I think my advice is, to ultimately to try and do something that's unique. There are a lot of games out there that are sort of copy pastes of Web 2 games with some NFTs and whatnot slapped on. Ultimately, I don't think those are the games that are going to onboard these sort of traditional gamers into Web 3 because it's not there's not enough incentive to leave the game that you've spent potentially years of your life playing and investing into in terms of your time and going into a sort of like a watered down Web3 equivalent. I think ultimately it's unique IPs, it's unique game modes, unique game mechanics that is going to entice new users to try out your game. Um, that's how traditional gamers behave. They look for something new. They look for something that surprises them or shocks them. They look for something that gives them a new experience that they haven't been able to have before. Um, I think at the same time, because of the competitive scene in Web3, you also do, unfortunately, I mean, it's just part of the game. You have to think of how to distribute your product. Because if you just create a great product that's fun, but you haven't thought about the marketing, you haven't thought about the distribution, you haven't thought about, well, how do we create this kind of social, viral sort of flywheel around the game? It's going to be very hard to get eyeballs on the game. And I think if you can start thinking about that from day one, you're probably going to be better off by the time you do actually have a product to showcase.
That makes sense to me. I want to go back to a word you used earlier, and that was degens, right? You said you have to get more, and then you asked me before the podcast started. You asked me, and I love the question, if I'm a dog or a cat person, and I said I'm a dog. There are a lot of degens who are cat people, but that has nothing to do with gaming. You know, um, why cater to just the degen? So when the meme coins seemed more of an appropriate area for the degens to be because they love the different coins for memes. But like, how do you separate gaming versus memes, and then how do you separate your population of degens versus game players?
I mean, this is one of the hardest things to do in Web3 gaming because at the end of the day, and again, this is just our approach. It's not necessarily the same approach that's going to work for everyone, but our approach is that you have to have a good product ultimately at the end of the day that appeals to real gamers. But at the same time, if you want to make a splash, if you want to make noise around your product and get eyeballs onto your product in Web3, then there has to be some component of your distribution and your go-to-market plan that does cater to that degen mindset. Because I think in Web3, you're absolutely correct. There's a lot of meme coins, a lot of cat coins, a lot of dog coins, and those are probably going to get most of the mind share when it comes to degens in the Web3 space. But of course, Web3, you kind of start creating these Venn diagrams of different pockets of people, your target audiences. And even though there's, a lot of the degens are in these meme coins, that culture permeates into other sort of circles in that Venn diagram within Web3. So even if you are creating something that's not typically, it's not a meme coin. There is still something of that nature, of that culture in Web3 that if you can leverage that mindset, if you can leverage an element of the sort of the memeable nature of Web3, the degen mindset, then you will be able to tap into that element of that core group of users and in some way, I guess, attract them to your product. I know for a fact that there's actually a really big project, and it's not our project, obviously. And I want to, I'll just do a little shout out. It's Monad. They're kind of one of the larger infrastructure plays coming out, but they have a huge community built around memes. And I think it's really interesting that they've tapped into that kind of direction and culture because it's almost synonymous with Web3 these days. And I think if you can choose to ignore it, but I think it's a lot more productive if you weaponize it.
I'm not ignoring it. I'm I- I've just been like the guy who like avoids like most like social group situations, you know. So it's harder for me to understand what's going on with the group, and with the community than it is others. Um, but I'm working on it. So you know, I want to talk about go back to the fact that there is a lot of games. There are a lot of game companies. There are a lot, and there's been talks, and there's going to be a talk at consensus saying that about mergers and acquisitions in the near future being at the protocol or exchange level. I don't know if they should be there. I'm thinking there's an opportunity for M&A at the gaming level. What does that possibility of gaming consolidation look like to you?
Yeah, honestly, it's not something that I've thought a lot about, at least in the context of our studio. And I think if we look at the traditional games landscape and we look at how mergers and acquisitions have played out in traditional gaming, um, you know, at least so far, it's not a great look. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions that have happened over the course of the last few years, and ultimately, it's playing out in current and more recent news cycles that these studios that were part of these M&As are now winding down, and they also have no choice because they no longer have autonomy to make their own decisions because they've been bought out. I think for me as a founder and owner of a studio, that definitely resonates, not in a good way, in terms of if I'm considering doing something like being acquired or something like that. I definitely don't have any plans on that anytime soon, simply because yeah, I think we're still fairly early in terms of our studio lifespan. We still have a vision and a goal that I would love to kind of continue to drive as the visionary and as the founder, as the sort of main sort of creating that North Star for the team. I'm still very committed to doing that. And I wouldn't want that vision to be diluted by another entity kind of coming in and having their own agenda.
That makes all the sense in the world to me. Sounds good. So, um, yeah, you did mention new opportunities. That you think it's exciting and fun to have new opportunities, and one of the things that I see as new opportunities is streaming, right?
Mm.
Streaming contributors, streaming games, streaming IP of gameplay. What do you see as the future there? And what can we take? What going to be the big takeaways from streaming?
I mean, yeah, there's obviously, I think you could talk about the future of streaming, but you could also just look at what's happening presently with streaming and how much of a force multiplier it already has been with games. It's been a force multiplier with competitive games, especially when it comes to esports and that context. Obviously, um, the games that tend to do well from in that regard are games that are sort of fast paced, high octane, a great viewer experience, team based as well. You can kind of create your own narratives, and so sort of that angle wrapped up in esports and competition has a lot of, it's shown to already have a lot of potential when it comes to streaming, and that is definitely one of the angles that we are going after. Is kind of like that esports angle, that highly streamable, high octane, exciting game opportunity for outplays at an individual as well as a team based level. We've seen that already have a lot of success. There are obviously a lot of other areas that streaming has been a force multiplier for gaming. When you think about content creation, when you think about uh, this kind of social element of gaming, where you have obviously MMOs, MMORPGs, even sort of role playing, like actual role playing games or sandbox games, where huge communities can kind of come together around one or multiple streamers. They're creating communities within their own communities. That has been just, again, in terms of user generated content, a massive force multiplier when it comes to user acquisition, marketing. Roblox, for example, they are famously known to have spent zero marketing dollars. Everything is just around community, word of mouth, content creation, and it just kind of snowballs from there. So I think we've already seen streaming play out in its own kind of way. Everyone knows that it's a massive deal when you're creating games, and if you can tap into that streaming market, then you're obviously positioning yourselves to do a lot better. You don't have to. Not all games require a big kind of streaming community, but I guess it's part of your business model, your business strategy, whether you want to do that or not. In the future, I think it's only going to get bigger, of course. Online communities, online gaming. Uh, I definitely think that's going to get bigger. I think in Web3 as well, that's also a vertical where there's a lot of untapped potential when it comes to streaming. These sort of aligned incentives that sort of tokenized economies allows for in Web3. I definitely think at some stage has the opportunity to disrupt that sector, and ultimately continue to expand that sector. So yeah, very bullish on streaming, very bullish on content creation, especially in the context of Web3 and our game.
You did mention something else. I had forgotten about this, but I wrote about it before, and it's been a few years since before COVID was esports. I used to fill out arenas. Then COVID happened, then it kind of stopped, right? What is the current landscape on the esports? And go and then going forward, what is the projection on it?
Yeah, I think it depends on whether you're asking Eastern or Western esports teams. Because the landscape is kind of like night and day when it comes to which part of the world you're in. For example, in the East, esports is huge. I mean, it's big in the West too. But I think in terms of the monetization and the business models of esports in the Eastern countries, like Korea, like China, like Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific area, their monetization models have been proven out to be very profitable, and the revenues kind of speak for themselves. Whereas I think in the West, there has been a lot more challenges around that. There was a lot of money being poured into esports from a venture capital perspective. And I think obviously of late, the valuations have come down. I think the business model in the West still, it's undergoing its own struggles and evolutions. I don't think they've quite found the right fit, but they are working on it. And so, yeah, I mean, for us, I think one of the interesting things about Web3 in the context of esports is that, especially for esports teams in the West that are still currently experimenting with their business models and their monetization strategies, I do think that Web3 offers them an interesting new option to look into, to kind of explore. I think there's a lot more benefit to be had for these Western teams to look into Web3 as another viable monetization model. I think for the East, they're pretty happy with where they are. They are looking into it, but I don't think it's as important for them to rush into anytime soon. But we're having conversations with esports teams from all areas. They're very productive conversations. We've already partnered with a few big esports teams out of Europe and the US, and we are in conversations with a lot more. I think there's opportunities to be had, whether you're from the East or the West. But I do think that there's a lot more opportunities for the Western teams to start looking into Web3 in the context of their business models.
I hope they do. Well, everything sounds fun to me, so I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it. You're playing your game, playing Nyan Heroes, and I want to thank you very much for your time today, for speaking with me. I have one last question, and it is: how can people find out more information about you, about Nyan Heroes? How can they start to play? How can they participate in your community? How can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not someone that generally tries to stay in the spotlight or anything, but of course, always happy to do podcasts with amazing hosts like yourself. If anyone wants to hear a little bit more about myself and my history, feel free to just search for Max, founder of Nyan Heroes, on Google or YouTube, and you'll see a bunch of content there. For the game itself, for Nyan Heroes, I definitely rather you guys look into that one. Follow us on Twitter. That is our main kind of social media handle that we kind of create content around. It is also our largest community with with around 700,000 followers on Twitter. We do post all of our major updates through Twitter, but we also have a pretty vibrant Discord with, I believe, over 400,000 people in the Discord. So if you want to get involved, follow those. We are actually going live at the moment with our season 2 pre-alpha. We have another airdrop event around season 2, which is called the Hunt for Catnip. So feel free to check us out on Epic Game Store. You can search Nyan Heroes demo and it'll come up. And yeah, be keen to get people trying out the game and getting their feedback, and I guess iterating on all the community feedback as we proceed.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Appreciate it.